All right, welcome back into Live Now. We have to make you aware of some protest activity taking place in Chicago. Not a lot of context right here. We do know that anti-ICE demonstrations have been taking place. While we were in a commercial break, we saw at least one woman pouring water and milk on her face. Certainly indicative of some sort of tear gas being deployed at some point throughout the afternoon. This is a live feed we're working with right here. I'm going to bump the audio up. Viewer discretion advised. We don't know what's going to be said. I always like to listen in to see what we can hear on the ground. Let's bump this up for a moment.
There are still some federal agents here.
Landscape mode.
Everybody's recording.
Start recording.
Sorry guys, let me get in here and get the big camera.
So we're seeing some of these protesters as the Trump administration, it was just announced earlier today, plans to federalize 300 members of the Illinois National Guard. Governor J.B. Pritzker said that earlier today. Pritzker said that the Guard received word from the Pentagon in the morning that the troops would be called up. He did not specify when or where they would be deployed, but President Trump has long threatened to send troops to Chicago. The governor's office did not respond to the AP immediately for extra detail or comment. So just wanted to make you aware that we are aware of the ongoing protest activity in Chicago. We're going to continue on with our planned coverage for the afternoon. If we see things picking up in the area, we will go back to it. But for now, we've got many more headlines to touch on. A live look at Capitol Hill on this Saturday afternoon. We do have to head back overseas for a moment here. I want to talk about Europe. I want to talk about Russia. There's a lot of headlines we want to discuss relating to the Russia-Ukraine war, and many more headlines relating to the wider conflict, if you will, and some of the discussions around NATO allies. National security analyst and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, still here with me. So Hal, a lot of the discussion this week has focused on, as I said, NATO allies. We've been tracking the words of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. I want to talk about the China connection to this war for a moment here. We do know that President Xi and President Putin have a tight relationship, and Reuters is now saying that China is providing intelligence to Russia. Specifically, they're providing satellite imagery that's enabling Moscow to better launch missile strikes inside of Ukraine. Hal, I think this is a good time to remind everyone about the China-Russia connection. How tight are the two states, and what's the trajectory of that relationship? Is it growing stronger by the week?
Austin, officially, it is a friendship that knows no bounds, so to speak. They've been cooperating very closely on this. Now, throughout the war, there's been a number of things, components, things for dual use, we call. They have military and civilian application, and China's been providing a lot of that, a lot of the weaponry that makes it into, that's fired into Ukraine, that when they go in there and they look at it, they find a lot of Chinese components are in there. It's also believed that China uses its position to kind of help Russia circumvent some of the sanctions regime to get things that they need for military purposes that they can't get on the open market. So they use China as kind of a straw man, if you will, to kind of get that and then ship it in there. Another thing that's been reported is that China has weapons factories. They keep saying, oh, we don't build weapons or drones and send them directly in. However, it is widely believed they send in components of those things. And now it's reported that they are actually have factories that they have built in Russia, building weapon systems and stuff for Russia. So technically not shipping it in, but it's Chinese owned, Chinese financed, Chinese run, and helping them do that. And of course, now, according to the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, they're saying that China is helping provide target data for missiles and drones to the Russians in Ukraine. And interestingly, they point out that a lot of this data is for facilities where there's foreign investment. In other words, where Europe or the US has invested in manufacturing, for example, helping them with drones or helping them with other weapon systems, things like that, and specifically targeting those areas, those locations, those sites in Ukraine where there are distinct Western interests. And this is hybrid warfare in some ways, is providing them intelligence. Now, with that said, this last week it's also been reported, I should say, the last couple of weeks, that the U.S. has changed its stance and is providing deep strike target intelligence to Ukraine that they're able to use with their long range drones and also with their new Flamingo missiles, their homemade cruise missiles, similar to our Tomahawk missiles. And of course, the active discussion is, will the U.S. actually provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine? And that seems to be going back and forth.
So Hal, we had a hunch that things might pick up in Chicago. We're going to break away from discussing Europe for a moment here because we are seeing some activity, not in Chicago, actually. We do have vantage point of Chicago. This is the vantage point of Chicago that we were looking at before we were talking about Europe. But let's get to this second vantage point. This is Portland, Oregon, we're being told from our Edge affiliate. And what we're seeing here are, and you know what, Hal? I'll actually just refer to you here. What do you make of this scene? We know that there's been protests planned. We are familiar with these types of images at this point. We saw it happen in Los Angeles. We've seen protests in Illinois, in Washington, D.C., and now it appears that we're seeing some of this activity and some people wiping their eyes in Portland, Oregon. Your reaction?
I think this, and I may be wrong, but I think this is the ICE facility in South Portland that was the scene of a number of other protests. You know, actually, a lot of the protest activity there, despite all the political rhetoric on it, hadn't been that intense, although it would pick up in the evenings. But during the day, it was not uncommon. If you went by that facility, you might see a handful of people out there protesting, although some of them show up and they have Antifa signs. And of course, Antifa has been designated by the president as a domestic terrorist organization. So that changes how people look at that. But what you're seeing here is they're dispersing the crowd, and it could be a variety of techniques. Sometimes they'll just throw out tear gas right away. Another technique is you'll throw out smoke, and in many cases, people, and it's not a very pleasant thing to do, but you throw out smoke, and then people mistakenly think, oh, it's not tear gas, and they start walking into it, and then you toss out the tear gas, and you tend to have a greater effect on the unruly mob, if you will. And I'm not saying they're doing that, but I am seeing it looks like a variety of smoke and gas, maybe a combination that they're using. In some areas, I'm seeing where they're clearly wearing gas masks, and in other areas, they weren't wearing gas masks, which means they may have just been using smoke to help disperse the crowd. But when you see colored smoke like that, that's probably not a tear gas smoke. That's just something that's done to get the crowd to move back. I will say though, if you ever get caught in that type of smoke in a closed space, it can have a definite effect on you. That's pretty toxic, toxic smoke. And it's, in an open area where you can get to air, you'll be okay. But if you're in a closed space, it can really do a number on you. So go ahead.
I always like to remind the public when we watch scenes like this, because you and I have sat on air and watched protests of this nature so many times throughout the year, and we see the use of less than lethal rounds being deployed in some cases. Just because something is less than lethal doesn't mean it's not dangerous and it can't hurt. Correct, Hal?
Absolutely. The less than lethal rubber bullets, people have been killed with those. If it's it's a rare shot, but every once in a while things can happen. Of course, you can also have things where people lose eyes or something else like that. So Less than lethal doesn't mean completely non-lethal. In fact, the term for a long time was non-lethal, and overall, they quit using the term non-lethal, and they would say less lethal or less than lethal. And even less than lethal, not everything there is completely non-lethal. And of course, depending on one's physiology or whatever, if you put tear gas out there, some people have a stronger effect. Or I should say it'll have a stronger effect on some people than have on others. So, with any of the weapons that are used, whether it's lethal or non-lethal, there always is a certain amount of risk as to what can happen. And so they're trying to disperse the crowd right now. A lot of what you're seeing here in Portland, and certainly what you're seeing in Chicago, is tied to the National Guard deployments. I think this weekend is when the National Guard units that were activated and training in Woodburn to the south and Salem are supposed to be deploying into Portland. So the reason you might see these crowds right now today is because they're expecting the National Guard presence to suddenly show up at places like the ICE facility in South Portland and maybe other facilities as well. And then, of course, there's a report out that within, I don't know, maybe right now, currently, that President Trump is federalizing National Guard troops in Illinois that would be deployed into, supposedly being deployed into Chicago. And so with both locations, you would see an impetus for a higher number of protesters in each, because they're expecting to see National Guard troops show up.
So I'm just going to ask our producers here, what is Edge 2? You guys, I believe, did we say that is Chicago? So we're looking at Chicago right now. You bring up Chicago. This is a vantage point of Chicago where we're seeing the video journalist on the ground running away from some smoke. You know what, Hal? Let's turn up the audio on this for a moment. I want to listen in. So, Hal, we're hearing these, and as is typical, this is a passionate group. We can hear the passion in their voices. Again, this is a raw feed that we're working with live in real time. The camera will be moving around. It'll be bouncing around. It'll be shaking around a lot. Appears to be somebody who may have been hit with some sort of gas. So, Hal, I had interrupted you, but there was some news out of Illinois today. Continue on with what we're hearing, and if you can, lend some context to what we're seeing here. Obviously, these are people that may have been exposed to some sort of tear gas.
Oh, that's tear gas, absolutely. Tear gas, or CS is sometimes called. But that's clearly tear gas. When they're doing stuff where they're putting water in people's eyes and stuff, tear gas doesn't just, it affects you in a number of different ways, but it's an irritant, and it'll irritate your eyes, which are very sensitive. It'll also, of course, irritate your throat, your lungs if you inhale it. So you have some people out here running around with gas masks, but they don't have the visual seal on their gas mask. So what they're doing is they're catching it in their eyes, and so they're pouring water, and that's about all you can do is pour water to try and get that out. But the other thing too is to magnify the amount of tear gas. They'll sometimes throw smoke grenades, and then throw tear gas in there, so it kind of dilutes it in a certain effect. Whereas people will get hit with tear gas, and those, of course, closer to the tear gas canisters will get hit more, but they'll see a larger cloud, and it'll cause people to move away from the cloud, which is that whole concept of using it to disperse a crowd. And I think that's probably a tactic that they're employing here. Although you see enough people running around, getting water in their eyes and running fast. When I saw people running away, it was very clear that whoever was in the immediate area recognized that they were getting hit with tear gas, and they moved out of there very quickly, as did the media. One thing I will say is not all media, but media that have been around, traditional media, they cover this stuff all the time, and they have a pretty much a honed sense of when it's time to move out of an area that's going to get a very unpleasant. So when you see the media, when you see photographers that have been around for a long time moving quickly, the best thing to do is, if you're not sure, is just follow, because they know how these things tend to. They know how the operational tempo, if you will, of these things and how they tend to roll out.
I don't want to cut you off here, but let's listen in. It looks like they're talking to an eyewitness here.
ICE murdering people, ICE shooting people on our streets. I guess the good news is she lived. But what we've seen for the last several hours is basically these ICE agents terrorizing the neighborhood, throwing tear gas, kind of grabbing people at random, throwing people to the ground. And then the Chicago Police Department arrived on scene, and it's supposed to be a sanctuary city, but the CPD is collaborating with ICE.
When you say collaborating, what do you mean? Like, what are some of the things you've seen?
We saw them that they were, even though the CPD, we watched them get tear gassed, they are still protecting ICE. Like, to me, if ICE kills someone and it's a sanctuary city, the cops should come and investigate ICE and protect the citizens. But the CPD instead stood behind the barricades with ICE, allowed them to drive their cars around, allowed them to tear gas the crowd, to brutally grab people up. Basically, when people in the neighborhood, people from around the city came out and were like, why are you shooting people? Why are you harassing people? CPD took the side of ICE. And that's just completely unacceptable to me. So I came out to join the people in demanding justice here.
So we're hearing one perspective, one voice from this group of protesters in Chicago. These are live cameras here, and again, we'll just reiterate to the people that are watching at home that we don't know what these people are going to say in real time. We're watching along with you. We want to give you the context, and we want to make you feel like you're watching this on the ground here, just like these video journalists are. Looks like in Chicago, at least, our video journalist is moving to a new position, possibly. Looks like they're doing the same. Let's bounce back to Portland, Oregon real quick here, where it looks like they're also adjusting their shot. But again, we see a similar scene in both cities. Again, courtesy of KPTV, they're the ones that are filming this thing in Portland. Hal, when we talk about Portland, Chicago, President Trump has mentioned the idea of using troops deploying to cities. He's used the word training ground in recent weeks. Can you elaborate on what he meant by those remarks? Do we have clarity?
There really isn't clarity what he meant. And I can tell you that within military circles, a lot of concern about that, which is, how do you mean training grounds? First off, if it's a training ground for civil support, maybe there would be some, some skills or whatever, tactics, techniques, whatever, for civil unrest that would be somewhat useful. And certainly that's civil unrest is not something that we don't encounter overseas in war zones. We encountered civil unrest, and certainly in Iraq, and we've seen it in other places where we have U.S. troops. So there may be some value there. But but Secretary Hegseth talked about increasing lethality, and then President Trump talked about using our cities as war grounds. Well, a lot of people heard those things together, and they go, "Wait a minute, you're talking about the military becoming more lethal, and you want to train in our cities?" Obviously, that raised a few concerns when they made that connection, if you will. I think what we're seeing, though, is President Trump is not reticent to use the military to go into cities to protect property, to protect federal personnel, in this case, protecting ICE agents, to protect both their static locations like the ICE facility in South Portland, but also to provide protection in the field. Interestingly, I heard that protester talking about that Chicago PD had showed up and they were on the side of ICE or standing by ICE. They were probably called by ICE for backup. They were probably said, "Look, we're confronting protesters. This is violent. We need assistance." And it has been, Governor Pritzker and certainly it's been clear down to the sort of city level. The mayor has also said that they will, going to help with the anti-immigration mission per se, but they don't want to be caught in a situation where they are obstructing that mission. They just need to be very careful. And it's been brought up many times. In fact, the LAPD chief out here was asked by the city council when we had federalized National Guard troops here. They said, "Well, can you give us a heads up when ICE is going out to do an enforcement mission or something like that?" And he said, "No, I can't." And they were frustrated. He says, "That's called obstruction of justice. That's a crime." Well, it's as much a crime in Chicago as it is in Los Angeles, and so they're trying to avoid doing things which would be obstructing federal law enforcement or obstructing the deployment of federal troops to federal facilities that could be used as a legal basis if the president was to ever decide to declare the Insurrection Act. And if you did have a city or state simply refusing to comply with federal laws, to comply with federal law enforcement, to comply with federal authority in the way of federal military troops doing a authorized legal federal mission, then you would give the legal justification for the president to basically invoke the Insurrection Act. Once the Insurrection Act is invoked, then federal troops or federalized troops can actually go out there and do law enforcement type of missions. It's one of those things that circumvents some of the restrictions under the Posse Comitatus Act of 1867. So it would change things, and so there, as you can see, there is a fine line. So when he was saying that, it's like, yeah, well, if they had actually lined up next to citizens against ICE, then you would have had a very difficult political and legal situation. So they did the right thing.